All right, get ready, because today we're diving into some seriously intense stuff.
Yeah.
Leviticus chapter 10. Buckle up.
Yeah, we're talking about the early priests and, how should I put this? Some pretty strict rules about how to worship.
Yeah, and maybe some pretty, let's just say some pretty dramatic consequences for not quite getting it right.
Right. We're looking at this commentary on Leviticus from, it's called My Christian Space, and they really go deep on this stuff.
So we're going to go deep too. Let's jump in. Right away, we meet these two guys, Nadav and Abihu. They're Aaron's sons. And they're priests, right?
Right.
They decide to offer incense. Seems pretty normal for a priest.
You'd think so, but the text very specifically calls it unauthorized fire.
Oh, okay. So that's where things get a little
Tricky.
a little spicy.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, they're consumed by fire, like from God.
Yeah.
Whoa. Makes you wonder, what was so wrong with their offering? Like, what lines did they cross that caused, that was a pretty extreme reaction.
Well, the commentary really dives into this, and it seems like it wasn't just like, oh, they used the wrong kind of fire. It's more about, like, understanding the power of God, and respecting that power by following the instructions very, very carefully. Every detail of worship had meaning.
Oh, wow.
And any change to that, even if they meant well, it could be seen as, like, challenging God's order,
It's almost like they were trying to be creative, but in a space that demanded, like, total obedience to the rules.
Yeah.
And that had huge consequences.
Yeah. It shows that you don't just approach God lightly. There was this awe and reverence that was woven into every part of worship.
Wow. Okay, so then we see Aaron.
Yeah.
He's the father of these two priests.
Yeah.
His reaction is silence.
Yeah.
Which is pretty intense considering what just happened.
Right. The commentary points this out, It says his silence is a really powerful act of faith. It wasn't about ignoring his grief. It was about, like, acknowledging how sacred this whole situation was and still obeying God even after this unimaginable tragedy.
It's so interesting, right, how different cultures view emotions so differently.
Mm-hmm.
Like grief, mourning.
Yeah.
Today, we might be encouraged to express it openly, But here, Aaron's restraint. Wow. It speaks volumes.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder what he was really feeling.
It does make you wonder what was going on under the surface. Like, his silence could be interpreted as accepting God's will,
Right.
Recognizing the divine order in the middle of this personal devastation.
Right.
But it also leaves space for us to imagine how deeply he was grieving
Mhm.
and the internal struggle. Who knows what was happening inside?
Yeah. Then things get even more intense. Nadav and Abihu's bodies, they're carried out of the camp.
Oh, yeah.
And this adds another layer to this whole idea of ritual purity.
Yeah. Right. The camp was like a symbol of life and holiness. Death, especially death seen as a punishment from God, that could disrupt that balance. So taking their bodies out, it really shows how important it was to keep the sacred space, sacred.
Almost like they were trying to stop spiritual contamination,
Yeah, like a quarantine.
Wow. And then, talk about piling on. Aaron and his other sons, they're told they can't mourn Nadav and Abihu, an insult to injury, right?
Well, you have to think about it from their perspective. Grief, it's natural, right?
Yeah.
But in this context, it could be seen as disorder. Like, showing your grief could be interpreted as a challenge to God's order, almost like you're questioning his justice.
So even grief had to be expressed within the rules. It shows how religion and social order were completely intertwined in this society.
Totally. And you know what? It makes you think about how we deal with grief today. The
Yeah.
tension between personal feelings and social norms, that's still a thing.
Yeah, it really is. Oh, and speaking of things that might be disruptive during a sacred ceremony, the text talks about alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Priests, no drinking before going into the tent of meeting.
Right. Clarity and focus.
No liquid courage before those rituals, huh?
It makes sense. You wouldn't want to mess up a ceremony or misinterpret God, you
Right.
know? But this idea of sobriety, when you're approaching the sacred, it's not just an Israelite thing, is it?
Right.
Other faiths and traditions, they see altered states, no matter how you get there, as incompatible with approaching the divine. It's fascinating.
It is. So we've got rules about fire, mourning, and even what you can and can't drink. And it's all about maintaining that separation between the holy and the regular world.
Exactly. And those boundaries, they get even more defined when you look at the instructions about eating sacrificial offerings. It's not just what they eat, but where and how.
So like a dining etiquette for priests.
Uh-huh. You could say that. Some offerings could only be eaten in certain places, like in the sanctuary or the courtyards around the tabernacle. And how they ate it mattered too. It all emphasized the sacredness of the act and the space.
Every action, like every bite, had a deeper meaning.
Exactly. Which brings us to, well, an interesting incident. A sin offering. Things get a little messy.
Oh, yeah. The sin offering that gets burned instead of eaten. Moses and Aaron have a bit of a...
A little bit of a moment.
Yes. Moses is not happy about them ignoring the rules.
No.
But then, this is what I love, both Moses and Aaron, they show this really deep understanding of the situation.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more about this understanding.
Well, Moses, even though he's angry at first, he doesn't just condemn them. He senses there's more to it. And Aaron, he explains that even though he knows they're supposed to eat the sin offering, doing it that day, well, it wouldn't have felt right to God.
So why not? I thought it was like a crucial part of the ritual.
Remember, Aaron's just lost his sons. He's grieving. He's saying that forcing himself to eat the offering and act all joyful and thankful would have been totally fake.
Like, look, I'm in no state to celebrate right now.
Exactly. And Moses, he gets it. He accepts that. Even with all these strict rules, sometimes human emotion and experience, you have to take that into account. It's compassionate.
That's amazing. It shows that even in this ancient text, with all its emphasis on order and obedience, there's room for compassion and human experience.
It's a reminder that connecting with the divine isn't just about actions. It's about what's going on inside.
Wow. So much to think about here. It's the whole idea of ritual purity, obedience, and grief. And it all happened thousands of years ago, but it still makes you think about how we approach the sacred today.
Definitely.
What do you think? Should we take a quick break and come back to explore those connections a bit more?
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we've been talking about these stories from Leviticus chapter 10. And I don't know about you, but I'm starting to see how these ancient rituals, the lessons they teach, they still kind of resonate today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the rituals themselves might seem, pretty far removed from our lives now, but the ideas behind them, reverence, obedience, understanding that our actions have consequences, that's timeless.
Yeah, exactly. Like that whole unauthorized fire thing. You could read it and just think, oh, they messed up the fire, no big deal. But it's deeper than that, isn't it? It's about respecting boundaries, the power of what's sacred.
Totally. And that idea, it fits into modern life too, Think about how we approach things that are sacred to us. A church, a temple, maybe a special tradition, or even just our own personal values. There's a certain way we act, right?
Like an unspoken code. A way of showing respect. Acknowledging that some things are okay in certain places, but not in others.
Right. Sometimes those boundaries are clear, like rules or laws, but sometimes they're more like, just what people do or what we believe.
And just like in Leviticus, what happens when you cross those lines? It can be different in every situation. A social faux pas, maybe you get in trouble with the law, or maybe it's just, something you have to deal with on your own.
Exactly. And that connects to Aaron's response to his sons. We talked about his silence, how it was faith and obedience. But it also shows how complicated grief can be, how society expects us to grieve. Do you see parallels to today?
For sure. Even now, there's like a script for how you're supposed to grieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
How you show your emotions, how long you mourn. And those norms can be helpful, but they can also feel stifling, especially if you're, going through it differently.
It's this constant push and pull, isn't it? Wanting to be yourself, but also fitting in with what's expected. And when it comes to grief, man, that's tough.
It really is. Think about all the rituals around death, funerals, wakes, memorials. They're a place to grieve together, but they also come with all these unwritten rules, how to act, what to wear, what to say.
And those rules, even if people mean well, sometimes they make it hard to, grieve in your own way. Like you have to perform your grief the right way. And that can make you feel really alone if you're experiencing it differently.
It's so true. We need to remember that there's no one right way to grieve. Everyone goes through it differently, and we should respect that, support each other.
Absolutely. Speaking of respect and how we behave, it made me think of that rule about priests and alcohol. No drinking before going into the tent meeting. At first, it seems kind of random, but it shows how important it was to be present, mindful, when you're dealing with the sacred.
Yeah, and that idea is huge today, even outside of religion. Think about mindfulness, meditation, being in the moment, no distractions, no substances clouding your mind.
Yeah, it's like you're preparing yourself, making space to connect with something bigger than yourself.
Whether it's your faith, your creativity, or even just like quiet time to reflect.
Exactly. It's about being intentional, being clear, not just going through the motions or looking for a distraction.
And you know what? That brings us back to those detailed instructions about the offerings. It wasn't just what they ate, but where and how. That wasn't random. It was all about reinforcing the idea that not all spaces are equal. Some are more sacred than others.
Right. It's like how we have different spaces for different things in our lives today. We act differently in a library than we do at a football game, you know? Or a church versus a shopping mall.
Yeah. Even in our homes, we have spaces for specific things.
Hmm.
A place to read quietly, a game room, a formal dining room. It's all about setting the mood, the purpose of the space.
Exactly. And just like they kept the holy separate from the everyday, we do that too. We create boundaries between what's sacred and what's ordinary.
Recognizing that some things, some spaces, some activities, they're special.
Mm-hmm.
And that means we need to approach them with intention, with respect.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest things we can take away from this. Leviticus, it might seem ancient, but it's really about reverence, intention, understanding that our actions matter. Those are things we still deal with today.
So true. Should we wrap up this exploration of ancient rituals and how they connect to us now? I think we found some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think so. It's been a great conversation. I hope our listener got something out of it too.
Me too. But before we go, one last thought to ponder. We talked about how even small changes to rituals could have big consequences back then.
And how we can apply those ideas of boundaries, reverence, intention to our lives now.
Exactly. So here's the question. What are the sacred spaces in your life? What lines do you draw to protect those spaces, to show them respect? And what happens when those boundaries are crossed? What are the consequences for you, for others?
Great questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those deeper connections that make life richer.